So again, we're going to talk about 4 things today that really I think are major decision points when you're ready to take that dive from being a full-time employee of someone and taking a step into doing your own thing with your startup. So I have a client. I'm going to name him Jim today. He is not named Jim, but that doesn't matter. I just wanted to keep that under wraps. So he's been working on his idea about a year, almost a full year. I've been working with him almost 4 months. And we are now at a point where we really have to decide whether he wants to go full time or not. Like we're at that decision point. Do we do that or do we not do that? So here's what we know right now. We know that the product that he's been working on, it's not fully built. We know that there are customers that would pay for the product. We know there are a number of them. We don't necessarily know if there are thousands yet or millions, but we do know there's quite a few people who will pay for this product. We are not exactly sure of the cost to acquire the customer, but we definitely have a method to acquire the customer, which I think is pretty solid. And then last but not least, it's going to take some time to finish building the product so we could actually get, bring on some beta customers. And he could do that for the most part himself. It would take obviously many months if he's part-time and much shorter if he's full-time on this. So he has a full-time job. He's got a couple kids. I mean, he's a busy man. And so he's been, like I said, he's been working on this really quite hard, I think, for about 6 or 7 months. So he's down the road a bit, that's for sure. So give me a thumbs up if you're just joining us here on the live stream, and let me know what's going on. In the comments, question of the day is, how many customers have you talked to today, potential or real customers? Just give me a thumbs up on that. Let me know what's going on there. And then also, if you have any questions, just throw them in the comments as well. I'd be happy to answer them. So there's 4 things, I believe there's 4 things that you really have to do when you're deciding on going from a full-time job, working for someone, to taking that dive into doing your startup. So oh yeah, there we go. Put the question. There's the question of the day. I forgot to put the question of the day in there. So the 4 things that I believe are really important is, do you have the time? and what I'm talking about is, do you have the time and ability to commit time to do this? So when you're going from a part-time gig, right, you're basically working for someone full-time, and you're jumping into this full-time, can you manage this in your daily? Because when I talk about time, there's 2 things to be concerned about. There is time if you're keeping your job, or maybe you're able to do part-time with your current job and then spend more time in your startup, which is absolutely awesome if you have that flexibility. Many people do not. They either have to be full-time at their job or they can't have their job. But if you have that flexibility, that's great. But let's assume that you do not have that flexibility. You have to keep your full-time job. So if you want to leave that, and when you leave, do you have the time? So when I say this, your family is part of this equation, and having an understanding of how that affects your family. Because many people, when they dive into a startup, right, and they leave a full-time job, they have to really take a deep dive into this, because most of the time they're either by themselves or there's 1 or 2 co-founders. So they're working 10, 12 hours a day, which means you're working more than you were in your previous job. So your family has to be okay with that and has to be supportive of that, and especially your partner in this process. So make sure that you are clear in that process, and that's thing number 1 in the decision process of taking the dive from being a full-time employee to working on your startup 24/7. First thing is time constraints, and can you do it? Is it supportive of your family, etc. Second thing is money. That you're probably underestimating it. So I'm going to guess you're underestimating it, because most people do underestimate the time it takes to actually get the product on the street. So just be aware that you might be underestimating that. So do you have the money to make sure that works? So now many people, they will have a part-time job, maybe they're doing consulting work on the side while they're working on their startup, or obviously they have a full-time job. But once you leave that full-time job, do you have any income, or do you need income? Because if you don't have income and you need income, that puts a ton of pressure on you to say, get a consulting gig or whatever. So I would not recommend doing that. What I would recommend doing is if you do feel like you can do consulting work as like a part-time, maybe 10, 12, 15 hours a week and still work in your startup, then get that consulting gig before you leave your full-time job. Make sure you get that gig nailed down, because that will take a ton of pressure off for if you need it. Now, if you're lucky enough that you don't really need it, you got money saved, that's great. But if you do not, please set up that gig before you really leave your full-time job, so you have that pressure off of you, the financial piece of that, right? Because you may need to hire a person or two in this process. You really just got to have a real clear understanding of what monetary resources you need. So what I recommend is doing a real simple budget, like for the next 6 to 12 months, whatever you think that time frame is, before you can have your product. So highly recommend doing that. Just do a simple budget and say, hey, here's what I think I'm going to need, and then add some what I call fluff to that, because you're probably going to be calculating and it's going to be wrong. You're going to be short. Most likely you're normally short in that process, both in time and money. The third thing we need is help. When I say help, you need help for your friends. You need help from someone smarter than you are, that's maybe been through this. Maybe it's someone in the industry that's done some similar things before. But I would, whether that's a hired consultant, or whether that's an advisor, or whether that's a friend of a friend, or whatever that is, make sure you're working with someone that has been through what you're going through. They will save you so much time. So they'll probably know shortcuts. They'll know some tips and tricks along the way. It's super important to find that, like I said, whether an advisor, whether a consultant, some kind of person that's been through what you're going through. And that's probably someone that's been in the startup environment, that has started companies before, or it's been someone in your industry, whatever your product industry is. That works as well. But you really need to line up the help. Like what kind of help do you have? And it's not just employee help. It's also consultant and or advisors that can help you, mentors. All those people are super helpful. And last part of the help piece is, again, talking about your family. Where does your family fit into this? And you need to be aware that, again, when most people take a deep dive into this, they are jumping into that full time. So it takes a lot of time on and it's a lot of stress on families. So be aware, have a conversation with your partner, make sure you guys are clear on what it's going to take for you to get your idea, into reality. It may take 3 months, take 6 months, may take 9 months, but make sure that you guys talk through that before you make that decision that you're going to do that. Don't just walk home one day and say, hey, by the way, I quit my job. That would be a bad thing. That'd be a very bad thing to do. And last is the fourth thing is customers. And when I talk about customers, I think it's important that you have customers, and I'm not saying you have paid customers that are buying your product. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying you need to know the customer. So when you're ready to take that step from having a job to not having a job and working on your startup full time, you need to have, like, do you have relationships with customers? Do you have some great relationships with customers that they're most likely going to be a paid customer, or at the very minimum a beta customer? I would say that's critical, to have some kind of relationship with customers. Also, do you understand the pain points of the customer? Do you understand the challenges of the customer? Do you understand what frustrates your customer? Do you understand those things about the customer? Because if you don't, you're a lot further away than you think you are. So you really need to know that piece about the customer. And last, when I'm talking about customers, is, have you done some research around how many potential customers are for your product? And man, I've seen this happen a number of times. Understand that, you need to understand how many customers, what your addressable market is. So is it 1,000 people? Is it 100,000 people? Is it 1,000,000 people? Or is it 100 people? Like, if it's 100 people, your product must be super expensive, because otherwise there's not enough customers to really make sense of it. But So make sure that you know that there is enough customers to support your idea. Again, it sounds so simple, but it's not being done by many times it happens. So here are the 4 things that you need to do before you take the step from being a full-time employee to being a full-time startup person that's trying to make their idea a reality. 1, you need time. Do you have the time constraints, or do you have the time ability with your family responsibility, etc., to really commit to 12, 14, 16 hours a day? And do you have the money? Do you have the resources to do that, right? And do you create a simple budget to do that? And 3rd, do you have help? And that may be hired help, it may be help from friends, it may be help from mentors, it may be help from consultants, etc. But do you have some help lined up? And last but not least is the customers. Do you have customer relationships? Do you know who to talk to? Do you know their pain points? Do you understand their frustrations? Those are the things you need to know. So those are the 4 things you really need to understand before you take that big step. I'm working with a client. His name's Jim. I'm calling him Jim. And we've been going through this over the last several months of like, when is the right time for him to make that step? So we've basically come up and we've walked through all these 4 things and figured out that, we're not quite ready, but we're super close. So you may be in the same position. Go ahead and leave some comments below and let me know if there's any questions. I'll be happy to answer those after this is done. So that's all I got today. Mike Grabham here in sunny Seattle. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.